The sun hung low over the small frontier town, casting a warm golden glow on the dusty street where people had gathered. It was the kind of town where every noise echoed boots on wooden boards, wagon wheels rolling slowly by, and the constant murmur of voices. On this particular day, the crowd was larger than usual. Folks came from nearby farms and ranches, because something unusual was happening in the center square, a public labor auction. At the front of the crowd stood a wooden platform. A few workers were being offered to ranchers and landowners who needed extra help for the season. Most people were interested, talking loudly, pointing at different individuals on the stage. But one figure drew more attention than all the others. A young woman stood at the far end of the platform, still and silent. A loose burlap sack covered her head, hiding her face completely. Her hands were tied only for formality, though she wasn't a danger to anyone. She stood with her shoulders slightly drawn inward, as if wishing to disappear. Some people whispered, wondering who she was. Others were simply curious, because it was unusual for someone to be presented in such a way. No one knew her name or her story, and the mystery made the crowd lean forward with interest. Even with her face hidden, something about her made her stand out. Her quiet presence, the way she held herself, the delicate way she breathed, it all hinted that she didn't belong there. Her name was Evelyn Carter, though no one in the crowd knew that. She hadn't imagined her life would lead her to that stage. Not long ago, she had lived peacefully on a small family farm. But life had changed quickly after a sudden illness took both her parents. With them gone, their debts came to light. Evelyn tried her best to handle everything, selling small items, working long hours for neighbors, doing whatever she could to keep the farm. But it wasn't enough. When the lenders demanded payment she couldn't give, the town council suggested temporary labor service to clear the debt. It wasn't meant to harm her. It was simply the harsh way the world worked in those days. Still, standing on that platform with a sack over her head felt like the lowest moment of her life. As the auctioneer announced the next item, the crowd shifted its attention away from the previous workers. The murmuring grew louder. Some were excited. Others were confused. A few felt uneasy. Next up, we have. Well, we'll lift the cover after the sale, the auctioneer said with an awkward laugh. But she's strong, quiet, and hardworking, suitable for house duties or light ranch help. We'll start the bidding at. Before he could finish, a new sound approached from the far edge of the square, the slow, steady steps of a horse. The crowd parted as a tall cowboy came into view, Caleb Morgan. Most people in town recognized him. He lived on a ranch several miles away, close enough to be known, but far enough that few really understood him. He wasn't unfriendly, just quiet. A man of few words, he spent most of his time caring for his horses, fixing fences, and working the land alone. Some said he preferred the company of animals over people. Others said he simply carried too much sadness in his heart to welcome new friendships. No one knew for sure. Caleb had come to town that day only to buy supplies: flour, nails, rope, things a ranch always needed. He wasn't looking for extra help, and he certainly wasn't planning to join the crowd. But as he rode past the town square, something made him pause. Maybe it was the unusual silence around the covered figure. Maybe it was the slight trembling of her hands. Or maybe, deep inside, he sensed something he couldn't name. He dismounted, tied his horse, and stepped closer. His boots made soft sounds in the dust. People moved aside, not expecting him to speak, but curious about why he had stopped. Caleb stood still for a moment, studying the figure on the platform. He wasn't judging or staring rudely, he simply felt something wasn't right. The woman didn't look like she belonged there. Even beneath the sack, he could see the curve of her shoulders, the fragile way she stood. There was no anger or mischief in her posture, only fear and uncertainty. It touched a part of him he hadn't felt in years, a part he thought he had buried long ago. The auctioneer looked surprised to see Caleb in the crowd. "Mr. Morgan." "Interested, sir?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He wasn't one to rush decisions, but he also wasn't a man to ignore his instincts. Something in him quietly insisted that he shouldn't walk away. A soft breeze blew across the square, lifting a corner of the burlap sack. For a split second, he saw the smooth line of her cheek and a few strands of golden hair escaping from behind the cover. That single moment changed everything. "I'll bid," Caleb said calmly. The crowd gasped. Caleb rarely participated in events like this. Some people whispered, wondering if they had heard correctly. The auctioneer quickly recovered from his surprise. "Very well, we have one bid. Do we hear another?" A few half-hearted offers came from others, mostly out of curiosity rather than genuine interest. But each time another person tried to top Caleb's bid, he quietly raised his hand again. He didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't push. He simply stayed steady, his expression calm but firm. Eventually, the crowd realized he wasn't giving up. No more bids. Going once, twice. "Sold to Mr. Caleb Morgan." The hammer struck the wooden block, and the crowd's chatter resumed at once. Evelyn heard everything from behind the burlap sack. Her heart tightened in her chest. The idea of belonging to someone frightened her, but something about the buyer's voice, quiet, calm, almost gentle, touched a small spark of hope inside her. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what kind of man he was. But something told her he might not be cruel. Caleb stepped onto the platform. The auctioneer handed him the rope that was loosely tied around Evelyn's wrists. But Caleb didn't grab it. Instead, he held it lightly, giving her space. "It's just a formality," he said softly, making sure she heard him through the fabric. "You're safe." Evelyn didn't speak, but she nodded slightly. Caleb hesitated before lifting the sack. He didn't want to startle her, so he moved slowly, carefully sliding the fabric upward. The crowd fell silent. The sack came off, and Evelyn's face was revealed. Her skin was soft and pale from long days indoors, her hair falling in gentle waves around her shoulders. Her eyes, though tired and unsure, shone with a quiet beauty that spoke of kindness and strength. There was no arrogance in her gaze, only a gentle innocence that made the entire square pause. Caleb felt his breath catch. He hadn't expected this. She wasn't just beautiful, she looked like someone who had been through too much, yet still held onto hope. There was a softness in her features, a grace that made him feel both protective and humbled. The crowd whispered in awe. Why was she covered? "She looks like an angel. I've never seen anyone like her." Evelyn lowered her gaze, embarrassed by the attention. But Caleb stepped forward and gently draped the sack behind her so it wouldn't fall again. "You're all right," he murmured. "No one here will harm you." It wasn't a loud promise, but it was steady, warm, and full of sincerity. Evelyn looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. And in that moment, she knew something important. This man wasn't like the others. He didn't see her as a product or a tool. He saw her as a person. Caleb nodded to her softly. "Let's go home." And with that quiet, simple sentence, her life took a new direction, one she had never imagined, one that would change both of them forever. Caleb walked beside Evelyn as they left the town square, keeping a quiet but steady pace so she wouldn't feel rushed. He didn't tug the rope tied loosely around her wrists. Instead, he held it gently, more like a guide than someone in control. When they reached his horse, he paused and looked at her with calm eyes. "You can ride," he said softly. "I'll walk beside you. It's a long road, and I don't want you to get tired." Evelyn looked at the horse nervously. She had ridden only a few times in her life, but she sensed she could trust him. Caleb helped her climb up without touching her more than necessary. He made sure she sat comfortably before starting toward the open countryside. The journey was quiet at first. Evelyn watched the land around her, rolling fields, tall grass swaying in the breeze, a bright sky that stretched endlessly. After the stress of the auction, everything felt strangely peaceful. Caleb walked on her left side, hands in his pockets, eyes on the road ahead. He didn't look upset or impatient. He moved with a calm rhythm that somehow made her relax. After a while, he asked gently, "Are you comfortable?" "Yes," she whispered. If he heard the shakiness in her voice, he didn't mention it. He simply nodded, and they continued. Hours passed slowly but peacefully. They didn't speak much, yet it didn't feel awkward. Caleb seemed like someone who understood silence, someone who didn't need to fill the air with unnecessary words. Evelyn appreciated that. After all she had been through, Quiet felt safe. By the time they reached his ranch, the sun was dipping low. The place was simple but beautiful, a wooden house with a porch, a barn, a small garden, and wide fields that glowed golden in the fading light. A few horses grazed lazily nearby, lifting their heads to watch the newcomers. "This is home," Caleb said softly, looking at her as if to make sure she wasn't afraid. Evelyn gave a small nod. Her heart felt uncertain, but not frightened. Caleb helped her down from the horse, then hesitated. "Your wrists," he said quietly. "Let me untie them." He worked slowly, making sure not to startle her. Once the rope fell away, Evelyn rubbed her wrists gently. It had not been tied tightly, but the freedom still felt new. "You're not expected to work tonight," Caleb said. "You're tired. You can rest first." He guided her up the porch steps and opened the door. Inside, the house was warm and clean. Not fancy, but neat in a way that showed he cared for it. There was a soft couch, a bookshelf with a few old novels, a table, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of freshly baked bread. "You can have the guest room," he said quietly. "It's small, but the bed is soft." He opened a door to the right. The room was cozy, with a simple quilt, a window that faced the pasture, and a small dresser. Evelyn stepped inside slowly. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure how else to express her gratitude. Caleb hesitated at the door. "If you need anything, just say my name. I'll be in the kitchen." Then he closed the door gently, giving her space. For a long moment, Evelyn stood still, taking everything in. She felt relief, exhaustion, and something she hadn't felt in months: safety. She sat on the bed, pressed her hands to her face, and breathed deeply. No one was shouting. No one was demanding. No one was treating her like she didn't matter. She had a door she could close. She had a bed that belonged only to her. That alone made her eyes sting with emotion. Later that evening, after washing up, Evelyn came to the kitchen. Caleb was preparing a simple meal: soup made from vegetables and fresh bread warmed in the oven. He had set a plate on the table. "Sit," he said gently. She sat across from him, her hands folded neatly. Her posture was careful, almost too polite. Caleb noticed but didn't comment. Instead, he offered her a bowl of warm soup. "I hope it tastes all right," he said. "I'm not the best cook." Evelyn took a spoonful. It was simple but comforting. "It's very good," she said honestly. A quiet smile softened his face, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few moments. After dinner, he brought out a small notebook and pencil. "I need to write your name down for records," he said gently. "You're free to tell me only what you're comfortable sharing." She nodded. "My name is Evelyn Carter," she said softly. I used to live on a farm with my parents." Her voice trembled a bit, but she took a breath and continued, speaking carefully, avoiding details that would bring sadness into the air. She talked about how her parents worked hard, how the farm had good years and hard ones, and how she tried to keep things going after they passed. Caleb listened quietly, his expression soft but serious. When she spoke of the debt and how she had ended up at the auction, she kept her words gentle, avoiding painful memories too deep to revisit. Caleb didn't ask for more. He understood that some stories needed time before they could be told fully. When she finished, he set the notebook aside. "Thank you," he said simply. "You've been through a lot, but you're safe here. No one will come to take you away." Those words eased something heavy inside her. "And you?" she asked quietly. "Do you live alone?" He nodded. "Yes, for a long time now." He didn't explain the loneliness or the quiet days on the ranch, but Evelyn could sense it in the way he moved, the way he spoke with gentle distance. She didn't press him. She understood that silence sometimes held stories too tender to touch. Days passed gently. Evelyn helped with small tasks not because she was forced, but because she wanted to. She fed the chickens, helped water the garden, swept the porch, and learned to cook a few meals for them both. Caleb never demanded anything. When she tried to do too much, he stopped her softly. "You don't owe me work," he said one morning. "I know," she replied with a small smile. "But helping makes me feel useful again." Caleb accepted that answer with a quiet nod. Slowly, they grew comfortable with each other. Their conversations were still simple, but they carried warmth. Caleb showed her how to care for the horses. She showed him how to make tea from dried herbs. Small moments turned into gentle memories, laughing when a young foal tried to nibble on her dress, sharing warm bread on the porch, talking quietly at sunset. Evelyn felt herself healing. Caleb, too, began to change. He smiled more. He spoke a little more. The silence in the house no longer felt heavy. Something soft had entered their lives, like sunlight after a long winter. But one afternoon, while Caleb was fixing a fence near the road, a wagon stopped by the property. A man stepped down and asked questions about Evelyn's past. The man wasn't rude, but he clearly believed she still had unpaid debt elsewhere. When Caleb returned to the house, his expression was thoughtful. Evelyn looked at him anxiously. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly. He shook his head gently. "Nothing that you need to worry about, but I want to make something clear." He sat across from her, his eyes kind but firm. "You are not tied to anyone now. Not to debt, not to anyone's claim, and not to me." He paused, letting the words settle. "Tomorrow I will go into town and clear whatever false records remain. After that, you will be fully free on paper and in life." Evelyn stared at him, shocked. But you deserve freedom," he said simply. "Real freedom?" Her eyes filled with emotion she didn't know how to hide. No one had ever fought for her without wanting something in return. And once you're free, Caleb continued softly, you can choose what comes next. You can stay, or you can leave. The choice will be yours alone. Evelyn swallowed hard. I want to stay," she whispered, her voice trembling with sincerity. "Not because I must, because this place feels like home, and because you have given me kindness when no one else did." Caleb met her gaze with a quiet warmth that said more than words ever could. "Then stay," he said gently, "as long as you wish." And in that moment, both of them understood that their lives had changed not through grand events or dramatic moments, but through quiet kindness, steady trust, and the simple miracle of two lonely hearts finding a place to belong. Their story was just beginning.